dear students. I hope you all are doing well. Today we will begin with a new chapter, and the name of the chapter is Soil Resources. When we talk about soil, soil is the uppermost layer of the earth's crust capable of sustaining life. When we talk about soil, soil is one of the most important natural resource on the earth's surface on which life depends directly or indirectly. Food such as cereal, pulses, fruits, vegetables, etc. are obtained directly from the soil, whereas food such as meat, milk, eggs, etc. are obtained indirectly from the soil. When we talk about soil, India being an agricultural country, soil is one of the most valuable resource in our country. Now, let us move on to the factors affecting soil formation. Before we move on with the factors, let us first know that the process of soil formation is known as pedogenesis. So what is pedogenesis? The process of soil formation. Now let us move on with the factors. The first factor that we have is climate. When we talk about climate, the temperature and the rainfall helps to break down the rock and thus the soil forms. What is the climate doing? It is weathering the rocks. It is helping the rocks to weather down with the help of, we have studied last year in the chapter weathering as well, the contraction and the expansion of rocks due to the heat. We also learned about the frost action where freeze and thaw of the rocks takes place, due to which the rock breaks. So that breaking up of the rock is caused by the climate. That is one of the most important factor of soil formation. When we talk about climate, climate also helps in the growth and the decay of vegetation, thus forming humus. We could also say that because of this climate, biochemical processes such as bacteria and fungi helping to decay the plants, the vegetation, also leads to the soil formation. Let us move on to the second factor. The second factor, that is the parent. That is the parent rock. So when we talk about the parent rock, the physical and the chemical composition of the parent rocks helps in determining the relative composition or the relative proportion of the different minerals in the soil layer. Now what does that mean? For example, let us talk about humans. Whatever characteristics your parents have, some of those characteristics gets passed on to you as well. In the same way, when we talk about the parent rock, those parent rock that have more amount of iron in them, the soil that forms later on will also have a definite proportion of iron content in them. So that is how the parent rock plays its role. Third factor that we have is the topography. Okay, so when we talk about the topography, we are basically talking about the ups and downs on the earth's surface. For example, in the hilly regions where the slope of the land is very steep, what happens when the rain falls or the water when it flows down? It starts to take away the materials along with it, the minerals along with it, the soil along with it. So what happens? What remains? Only a thin layer of the soil will remain in these kind of slopes. Whereas if we talk about the plain region, as it is undisturbed by these factors, the soil that forms there are very thick and are also of good quality, or we could say they are fertile. Lastly, when we talk about the last factor, the fourth factor, that is time. Time is a very very important factor. Why? Because the soil formation does not happen overnight. It takes many years for the soil to form. So thus the time as a factor also plays a very important role in soil formation. Now let us move on to the next topic, that is the soil profile. Now what is soil profile? Soil profile is the section showing the successive layers of soil. So when we talk about the soil profile, section showing the successive layers of soil. So these are the successive layers. These successive layers of the soil is known as your soil profile. Now let us learn about the soil profile in a little detail. When we talk about the soil profile, it basically has 4 layers. The first one being the topsoil. Next to it we have the subsoil. Thirdly we have the weathered rock. And lastly we have the parent rock. Also known as the bed rock. So when we talk about the first layer, that is the topsoil, let us talk about the first layer. The topsoil is made up of fine particles and organic matter such as the humus. When we talk about the second layer, that is the subsoil, is also made up of fine particles, but in case of the subsoil, the soil is little compact. Now let us move on to the third layer, that is the weathered rock. The weathered rock, this layer is basically made up of partly weathered rocks, and also when we talk about this layer, it is the first layer of soil formation. Lastly, when we talk about the parent rock or the bed rock, these are the unweathered rocks. These are basically the unweathered solid rocks that we have on the earth's surface. So now when we talk about the soil profile is the section showing the successive layers of soil. Which are those layers? Topsoil, subsoil, weathered rock and the parent rock or the bed rock. Now let us move on to the types of soil. So the first that we have is the sandy soil. The second that we have is the clayey soil. The third that we have is the loamy soil. So let us talk about the sandy soil first. Sandy soil is made up of 60% of sand and 10% of clay. When we talk about the sandy soil, these are loose and porous. That means water can seep through easily. Now let us talk about the second type, that is the clayey soil. Clayey soil is made up of 60% of clay. When we talk about the clayey soil, the soil can hold moisture. That means they are moisture retentive. When we talk about the third type of soil, that is the loamy soil. Loamy soil is made up of sand and clay. It's a mixture of sand and clay. When we talk about the loamy soil is very good for farming and gardening. Now let us move on to the other type of soil according to their formation. When we talk about the soil according to their formation, there are 2 types. Residual soil and transported soil. So when we talk about the residual soil, these soils are found wherever they are formed. So thus they are also called in are found wherever they are formed. For example, we have the black soil, red soil, etc. When we talk about the transported soil are those soils which are carried down by the agents of gradation. Agents of gradation such as wind, water, etc. These are not found where they are formed. They are transported and they are found somewhere else from where they are formed. So when we talk about the transported soil, an example could be alluvial soil. So when we talk about the soil according to their formation, two types: residual soil, transported soil. Residual soils are found wherever they are formed, thus they are known as in situ. Transported soils are found somewhere else from where they are formed. They are carried down by agents of gradation such as wind, water, etc. Examples for residual soil would be black soil and red soil. Example for transported soil would be your alluvial soil. Now let us move on to the major types of soil. So when we talk about the major soil, the first soil that we have is the alluvial soil. The alluvial soil. Alluvial soil is made up of fine particles brought down by the rivers and its tributaries. As it is being brought down, we can clearly come to know that it is transported type of soil. These soil are basically found in the largest amount. It covers up to 40% of the land area. When we talk about the alluvial soil, these soils are said to be very, very fertile. Now let us move on to the characteristics of alluvial soil. So the number one characteristic is that alluvial soil is rich in humus, potash and lime. Number two, they are deficient in nitrogen and phosphorus. When we talk about the third characteristic, these are good for agriculture. Good for agriculture as the soil is fertile. Lastly, they are found at a depth of about 500 meters. So let us talk about the characteristics one more time. Characteristics of alluvial soil. First one, they are rich in humus, potash and lime. Number two, deficient in nitrogen and phosphorus. Number three, they are good for agriculture. Why? Because the soil is fertile. Fourthly, they are found at a depth of about 500 meters. When we talk about the alluvial soil, it includes three types of alluvium. The first one, the coastal alluvium. Number two, we have the deltaic alluvium. The third type of alluvium that we have is the inland alluvium. So when we talk about alluvial soil includes three types of alluvium. The first one is your coastal alluvium, which comes from the coastal areas. Deltaic alluvium, which comes from the delta region. Inland alluvium, which comes from the inland areas. So when we talk about the alluvial soil are basically of two types: bhangar and new alluvium. When we talk about bhangar, they are found at the higher levels of the plains. Whereas when we talk about khadar, khadar is found at the lower beds of the plain region. When we talk about bhangar, bhangar is mostly clay and non-porous. Whereas when we talk about khadar, khadar is loamy and porous. Next, when we talk about bhangar, bhangar is less fertile. Whereas when we talk about khadar, khadar is more fertile. One more time, when we talk about the alluvial soil, there are basically of two types, bhangar and khadar. Bhangar is the older alluvium, khadar is the newer alluvium. When we talk about bhangar, bhangar is found at the higher level of the plains, whereas khadar is found in the lower beds of the plains. When we talk about bhangar, bhangar is mostly clay and non-porous, whereas khadar is loamy and porous. Lastly, when we talk about bhangar, bhangar is less fertile, khadar is more fertile. When we talk about the khadar soil is more fertile basically because it is replenished every year. That means new soil are deposited every year in case of the khadar soil, making it more fertile. Now let us talk about the major crops grown in alluvial soil. The major crops include wheat, sugarcane, oilseeds, etc. So these are included as the major crops in case of alluvial soil. Now let us talk about the regions. Where do we find the alluvial soil? These are alluvial soil is mostly found in the Indus, Ganga, Brahmaputra region. Other than that, it is also found in many states such as Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal. So when we talk about the alluvial soil, let us revise once. Alluvial soil is the most fertile soil. We know that alluvial soil is rich in humus, potash, lime. It is poorer in case of nitrogen, phosphorus. It is found at a depth of about 500 meters. It is a very fertile soil. When we talk about the alluvial soil, basically they are of two types, bhangar and khadar, older alluvium and the newer alluvium. When we talk about the alluvial soil, the major crops include wheat, sugarcane, oilseeds, etc. When we talk about the regions, Indus, Ganga, Brahmaputra region and areas of Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and West Bengal.